Brad, it is so great to have you with us. Finally, this has been a long time coming. I'm thrilled.
Same. I'm really stoked.
For our listeners, Brad was one of the podcasts that I had lined up to happen when I suddenly discovered that I had a cancerous lump in my breast. And I was like, oh, God. And then every life just took over. And I sent this sort of cryptic message to you, and you were very kind and very understanding. And then I just disappeared. But then I resurfaced again. And thank you for holding out and we finally making it happen.
Yeah, and I'm very thankful that you resurfaced well,
Yeah,
better than well.
yeah, better than I was when I was talking to you in July for sure.
Yeah.
So I love asking people where they are because I feel very fortunate that I am surrounded by so many incredible people dotted all over the world. And it's just really wonderful to just help our listeners kind of picture where people are. So, where are you today? And as you also answer that, just explain and describe about the work you're doing at the moment.
Yeah. Where I'm at right now is this phrase I heard recently, human flourishing. And it's really resonating with me for a variety of reasons, partly because a lot of my work is in story, and we are leading a program right now around brain health and human flourishing. Which is going to involve a short film documentary, some branding, and just really helping to shape the narrative for global audiences so that they can really start to be intentional and possibly even think more about how we build the life that we love. And this kind of idea of like, not just survival, not even just thriving, but like flourishing.
Nice. And where are you in the world right now?
I am physically in Houston, Texas.
We're going to touch on this, I know, throughout this conversation, but I just really want to just touch on that word of intention. It's something that I think we both really just held on to. And I think it's something that it's entering a little bit more into leadership stuff, self-reflection stuff, just really think people are kind of waking up and realizing, how can I live my life with intention? And if I did, what would that look like? And what kind of flourishing happens when that does happen? So I just wanted to
Mm.
hold on to that because I think that's probably where, yeah, much of what we talk about will probably be hung on. Now, the first time that we spoke, that I just got really excited, you talked about being a rebellious optimist. So, what does that mean to you today? And how has that belief sort of been shaped or challenged over time?
Wow. I love this question. I think I love it most from what you just said. Like, what does it mean today? I don't know that I had ever heard it before. It was just one of my good buddies who eventually became the co-host of of our show Curiosity. We just kind of were rolling around in this idea of what we called the and it was the letters UN in brackets. And so it was originally around what are the things that we believe to be true that are not, just fundamentally aren't actually a real part of our anatomy, our identity, our purpose, our reality. But when we believe that they are, they can shape us. And so
Yeah.
I think the first thing is the role of metacognition, right? To think about thinking and to really be introspective in how we see ourselves, because how we see ourselves is how we interact with the spaces and the world and the humans that are around us, right? And I heard this quote one time that's someone said, which is we see ourselves how we think others see us. And
Yes. Yeah.
if we pause that for a moment and instead we say, well, how do I see myself? And who am I? And who do I want to be? And when I really start to think about not just what my purpose is or how I advance my purpose, but why? And that is really what sparked this idea of rebellious optimism. It's because every human, once we start to understand who we are, then we start to carve our own path in the universe. And that's where I think something more eternal happens.
Yeah. And it just, you said sort of these little steps. So it's how you think about yourself, how you think about your potential, how you think about a certain situation. But yeah, but the thing is, if you're rebelliously challenge how you have always seen yourself, or how you may think that other people see you, you reframe that. It is unbelievable how powerful that is, because you fundamentally then change that conversation. And it might seem very small, but it is huge, because the moment you change that in your mind, that's what manifestation is, right? It has this sort of snowball effect. And it really, you are your thoughts. Yeah. I talk about this in my book as well, and it's so powerful. A handful of religions do talk about this. Buddhism talks about this, and it's something that in our society, I think that we don't pay enough attention to this. It's not something that we're reminded about enough.
It's very easy to live a passive life.
Yes.
It's arguably far more common than it is to live an intentional or an intentionally active life, right? It could be cultural, it could be geographic, it could be socioeconomic. I think, regardless, though, we do have kind of this moment in between stimulus and response. That's where our real power is. We get to choose not only how we interact, but also how we respond. And it's taking a moment to sit in the power of the pause before we act. And what I've been realizing recently is we really underestimate the power of nuances. Things that we consider to be unimportant or we deprioritize, I'm realizing more and more oftentimes are maybe some of the most important parts of our lived experiences. And when we identify them, when we name them, when we hold them, it starts to open up a greater opportunity space to really become who we want to be.
Gosh. As our listeners can probably tell, you are great at story. And you're great at sort of painting images and bringing your thinking to life. Why do you think story is still the most powerful way to make sense of the world? And perhaps you can, I don't know, bring to life this power of sharing ideas from your own experience.
I think the direct answer is we often hear in conversations around just human anatomy and science that the opposable thumb is one of our greatest strengths and the reason our species has been able to evolve the way that it has. I would say communication is also in that conversation. The way that humans are able to communicate is just fundamentally different from really every other species that exists, right? And every species communicates in different ways. One of my favorite stories I've ever heard is how this plant root system in some part of the world notified a tree miles away that this invasive species was starting to invade the region, and the tree started to produce a certain sap that would protect it, which is fascinating in every way,
Yeah.
right? It's definitely not that we are the only species that communicates in a very complex way. It's the way that we are able to communicate, and maybe almost the why that we communicate the way that we do, that is one of our greatest superpowers as a species. And so I think that's fundamentally why story is so core to not only human evolution, but, as I mentioned at the very beginning, human flourishing. And it's not just the communication we have and the conversations we have with one another. It's maybe even more important, what's the story that we're telling ourselves? There was a book I read recently called It Takes What It Takes, which should be a life philosophy that we all live by, because it takes what it takes. It's like, you want to do something. What does it take? It takes what it
It
takes.
takes, it takes. Yeah.
But there was this kind of one line that just really resonated with me and echoed, and it was exactly that. It was, what's the advertising campaign that you're playing in your head about yourself? And so, while it's important that we share story to not only capture culture and societies, lived experiences, and individual human stories that then inspire greatness in others who then do that in turn, right? But it's not always like a capture backwards of something that already happened. And I think oftentimes that's how we think of story. But I think of story as something that's fully alive, that it's present, it's in this moment with us, and it's evolving and adapting and changing with us rather than something that we talk about after the fact. And I came to that realization because I was doing a sound bath. And for those that don't know, a sound bath is basically like different bowls and what I would almost consider like things you could find in the kitchen. And someone plays almost like in an instrument style, different sounds, and it echoes, and it's very
I mean,
beautiful.
how amazing is
It's
that?
absolutely incredible. And that we were like outside, and it's like a perfectly clear day. And
God.
the story's a little bit wild if I back up from that moment and then I come back to it. In 2024, I lost one of my best friends to terminal stage 4 colorectal cancer. And he was also the co-host of our podcast, Curiosity. And I learned that type of grief when you lose someone that you almost consider to be a brother, it doesn't necessarily go away. It becomes a part of you and it becomes a motivator. And you want to honor their legacy. And two of the words that he often said were onward and echo. And
Mm.
so much earlier that morning, I was sitting having coffee with my wife, and I just felt really compelled to get up and go for a little nature walk. We were staying in this cool little cabin, and we had a couple of acres. And I end at the top of this little hillside, and there's this like outdoor day bed. And sitting on the day bed is this little metal box. And I open up the metal box, and in the metal box, there's two pens and a book, like a little journal. And so I sit on the daybed, and it's the desert, right? So it's very quiet. It's early morning. The sun is shining. The sky is perfectly blue. And I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, I want to write a word because many people had written in the journal their reflections or thoughts and they had paragraphs and paragraphs. And I was like, I feel like one word is appropriate. And I just want to describe the space I'm in a single word, which is very hard for me because I like using many words. So for me to use one word is a really difficult task. And I wanted to challenge myself. It's a new year. I'm going to challenge myself. So the first word I wrote the word alchemy. But while it's a great word, it was a little too on the nose because the cabin was called the Alchemist Retreat. So I flipped to the second page or a new page and I wrote peace, like Peace. And I was like, that's too expected. That's not it. And I wrote echo. And I thought, echo is definitely the word. So then I go back inside the cabin and sit back by the fire with Sky. And I'm like, I don't always consciously remember my dreams at a level of recall the following morning. But last night I had this really interesting dream. So I'm telling her the story. And I said there was this ginormous mahogany table with these high tobacco leather backed chairs. And there's this figure to my left who's speaking at a pace and a decibel that almost made you have this visceral reaction. And this is all happening in my dream the night before. And there's a second figure to the right of that figure who's just sitting with their arms folded over their chest with this booming presence, but completely quiet. And I look, and in the dream, it's my friend Scott. And I leap across the table and I fall into his arms and I'm like weeping and I can feel him. I can't hear him, but I can feel him whispering words of wisdom in my ear and just gave me this total peace. So, like, I'm kind of remembering these things backwards, like in real time. And then we go to the sound bath. And so now here I am and I have this transcendent moment where I feel like I'm somewhere between heaven and earth and I'm a very spiritual person, and so I kind of felt like God speaking, and story was the word that emerged. And my favorite visual of the Echo framework or story is Simon Sinek's three concentric circles of the why, the how, and the what. And then I've kind of layered on this fourth dimension of what I call infinite ambitions or infinite aspirations. And the whole logic of the Echo framework is that we start with human belief system, right? How do we gather together? And then how do we advance that? And then what does that become, right? That's how I interpret it. But then what I love about this visual is that's not the conclusion, that's the beginning. And that's
Yeah,
for
right.
missions. but we still think of it as linear, even when we're looking at the circles, but circles aren't linear. So the infinite aspirations or infinite ambitions aren't just sitting at a certain point, they're infinite. And so in this moment, I feel this presence of story is your purpose, and not just to tell story, but to make story.
Yeah.
And I had not ever before that moment thought of my life's work as story. I had thought of it as creative. I had thought of it as being imaginative, creating products, creating services, doing film, like all these different things I had thought of, but I had not ever had a single word that was story until that moment. And then fast forward a few months later, my actual role became very focused on story. Unbeknown to me, it was an ask that came up is, "Hey, would you like to lead story?" And I was like, "Obviously, yes."
I have just discovered my purpose. Just as a compliment to that. And it's so fascinating listening because you're talking about echo. And when I think of echo, I think of ripples, right? Because it's the ripples of sound that then that's what that
Yeah.
is. And obviously the reason we connected a year ago or more than a year ago was really much rooted in our joint belief of the power of humanity and more human ways of doing
Yeah.
things. And in my book, I talk about these three pillars. One is self-awareness, which is totally what we've just been talking about. Again, who are you? What makes you tick? What makes you happy? How can you live your life with intention? What does that look like? Really truly understanding yourself. And that takes time. It takes the pause. It takes time to reflect. Then it's interdependence. So again, like we need other people to be able to create, find the answers to things. We cannot do things in a bubble. We need to call on other contributors and bring in other sectors or other people or other divisions. And again, that then
Mm.
that falls into the self-awareness part because, ego, we can't think that we are the best at everything. We need to be vulnerable. We need to be humble. We need to realize that we need others. But then it comes this echo piece, which is actually, I call it interconnectedness. So,
Mm.
a decision made in one place, but not just a decision, something done in one place impacts someone in another place. That's that echo. But it's being aware that power can be used for good. It can be used for evil as well. And if we're not careful with the power of what we have access to, those ripples can do amazing things or they can do
Mm.
so amazing things.
Well, and it's interesting for so many reasons, and you articulated it so well. I think sort of the build on that is this idea that even in this moment when I'm in Savasana doing the sound bath, I'm literally in the echo of sound. And so the whole just
Yeah.
nature of it was like there was a physical experience that was happening that
Okay. Yeah.
was literally being in the echo. But then there was also this, if I think about it from the origin of human existence, like I'm a believer in like God spoke and the universe emerged in this beautiful, intricate way that's unfathomable. But there's an echo of that continues forever, right?
And the thing is all the sort of, it all just happened
Yeah,
together.
yeah, literally. I could not have architected that
Yeah.
if I tried a gajillion times, like, nor did I know that experience was going to happen and I was gonna have this like sort of moment of enlightenment. It was like just occurred. And I think why I get so excited about that is because like when I'm creating story, my ultimate hope is that other people, humans that are watching it start to see themselves in the story and that this becomes what unlocks and inspires greatness in themselves so that they can truly build the life that they love. That's why I love stories so much. And I think it's the greatest medium to inspire culture. And culture is one of the most profound ways to shape not only humans at a societal level or at a community level, but also at a very individual level.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So you said something the last time we spoke, which I absolutely loved, and it has stayed with me. What sounds are you not hearing? What are we missing right now as individuals or as leaders?
I think we're at an interesting inflection point around human agency. And what really got me thinking about this was an article that was published in the Harvard Business Review around human agency and human judgment. And there was a survey that was done of a little less than 2,000 people. And in the survey, they found that high optimism, high agency organizations are utilizing artificial intelligence, especially Gen AI and agentic, to augment human judgment. Low agency, low optimism organizations or people within the organization that are operating with low optimism, low agency, are utilizing Gen and agentic AI to offload thinking. And it was very interesting. You could even put AI aside for a moment because not we're not universally using AI. It's scaled pretty significantly at this point, but at a global population level, there's still humans in their day to day who are using it less than others, and others who are using it more than others. And so that's why I surface and name the role of technology, and then specifically the examples of Gen and agentic. But the role of agency, I think, is becoming more important than ever because of how rapidly technology is advancing. If we go back just about 20 years to 2005, 2006, and we look at how much technology has reshaped culture and our daily lives, we're talking, we went to a movie store like a Blockbuster, we went to a bank, deposited a check, we used MapQuest or a Rand McNally paper map. This is not that long ago when the way that we interacted with the world around us and how we navigated our reality was just fundamentally different, right? Social media was barely even a part of our daily lives. Like Facebook, you still had to have a .edu to even get an account. So we're talking about not that long ago, incredible transformation technologically. The advancement of the smartphone and the development of the smartphone, streaming music and film and television, how that democratized access to content. Then we get into the role of social media and how it has become such a common part of our daily activities and has almost given us even more attachment to our device. There was an interesting study as well done by the Harvard Business Review around people's relationship with their phone. And the study found that 85% of the time, we were never more than 15 feet away from our device. And what's so fascinating about this is that study was done in 2010.
Oh, wow.
So we're only a few years in at that point to the smartphone really playing an active role. And social media is so new at this point that it's not as mainstream as it is today and as interwoven in the fabric of society as it is today. But we look at the evolution of social media. We look at the role of streaming. We look at the idea that brands were able to build trust and confidence between humans and products. If I were to say in 2005, 2006, you're going to get in strangers' cars or you're going to stay in strangers' homes, you would be like, you're out of your mind. But now we use Uber and Airbnb on a regular basis and literally don't even think about it anymore. And fundamentally, it's because they were able to build trust and confidence in a brand. And they were able to activate a variety of technologies in a combinatory manner that brought these different technologies together and made these systems possible. And so when we then bring in technologies like agentic and generative AI as another part of the conversation, I am a huge proponent that these are tools and they are very powerful tools that have a lot of opportunity to help create an even more flourishing society. And sure, with every good, there can be negatives, and we all know that. I'm not here to argue that case. But what I will say is that is why the last 20 years are going to shape the next 200 or the next 2000 in a very powerful way because there's so much abundance of access to intelligence, to information, to content. And that is why I believe human agency and being intentional about building the life that you want to build and being introspective and shaping your life and being a rebellious optimist and really carving your own path in the universe starts with metacognition, thinking about thinking. It really layers in the role of
Mm.
introspective living where I check in with myself every single day.
So important to really stop and reflect on that. Because as we're talking about AI, and that actually brings me to my next question, but knowing that the power that these tech companies and these algorithms have over us, and if we give that power completely over, we become a slave to that. And so this intentionality, this agency, being aware of who we are, what do we stand for, what is important to us, because even when it comes to things like the algorithm, you then can control that even more if that is becoming part of your day-to-day routine.
And that's interesting. Maybe that's almost like a litmus test or a benchmark for self. Is the algorithm deciding what I'm seeing, or am I deciding the role that the algorithm's going to play? We have to choose to put
Exactly.
definition around the technology, or it's just going to do what it's designed to do. But you
Exactly.
also have the opportunity to shape that.
Yeah.
You can go into your search feed and you can intentionally search for things that you're actually interested in. And you can follow the accounts that you actually want to follow and unfollow the ones that you don't. But I think it also goes back to a fundamental principle of saying yes to the right things and saying no to the right things.
Yeah.
I remember 3 or 4 years ago now, at the time, I was talking with a friend of mine and I had shared with them this year, we're going to master 3 words: yes and no.
Nice. Yeah.
When to say yes, when to say it, and when to say no. Because
Yeah.
all of them are important. I'm
Yeah.
really good at the yes and the and. I am abysmal at the no.
Yeah. And I mean, without going into too much detail, but having gone through the last year, and sometimes it does take pretty hefty challenges in our lives, not even hefty ones, actually. Sometimes it can just be small challenges. It is those moments that sort of shake you up a little bit and get you to sort of, there's something out of balance. What is that? Or why did I respond in that way? Or hold on a second, this is not cool, whatever it might be. But yeah, it's interesting how when you discover those boundaries and you suddenly realize, actually, they are really important. And no is a very important word to master. And when you do, suddenly agency over your life, right? And
And what it does is it creates space for the right yeses because you
exactly.
said no
Yeah.
to the right nos. And that's what actually opens up the opportunity for the serendipity of the universe to really conspire with you in
Mm,
ways that are truly helping you to fulfill your purpose.
yeah. So reflecting on this intersection of AI and creativity, human experience, as intelligence becomes more abundant, what becomes more uniquely human?
I would say our humanity becomes more uniquely human.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of what I'm starting to see more and more of is technology is actually bringing us closer to our humanity rather than pushing us further away from it. And you're already seeing examples in society where people are rejecting some of the AI generated types of content because they
Totally.
just don't feel authentic.
Yeah.
And so I think authenticity becomes more prevalent, morality, spirituality. I really am starting to see it already. I'm seeing it in very small ways. To me, it feels very obvious because it's happening in the nuances. It's happening in the micro moments of daily
Totally.
living. And so that's what I'm seeing. And I'm getting so excited about it because I think that just like every other time in human history when we've had major advancements, there's always a hype cycle. I think this hype cycle might be faster than any other because it's scaling faster. And so it might actually hit that peak hype and then sort of level out at a faster rate because of the speed at which it's been evolving. Like Gen AI, for example, took 60 days to reach 100 million users. Instagram took 4.5 years to reach 100 million users. So the speed's a lot faster, which means that the hype cycles may be as well. The Hermes example I thought was absolutely fascinating, where they intentionally found an artist in France to hand draw their campaign launch in
Yeah,
2026 because they wanted it to be so obvious that it was made by a human because they were finding that people were not interacting with their brand at the same emotional level they
totally.
had previously when they weren't using AI generated content, which is fascinating because it's so easy to say, oh, people aren't going to know the difference, whatever it might be. But I think there's just
We do.
this
I
part of
do. You
our,
do.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, there's
Like
just
just
some,
reflect on yourself. I
yeah,
can tell,
exactly.
right? What like it's so crazy when we like the consumer. Well, I am the consumer and I know how I
Yeah,
feel when I
good
like go
point.
into something.
Yeah, I can
And
even tell on social media when someone's written something versus when AI's written it, and I just get this like visceral reaction. I'm like, I know you didn't write that, and I don't like seeing. It's fine when I'm talking to ChatGPT, but when you're taking ChatGPT's copy and you're putting it into your post, I just kind of get this reaction where I'm like, great insight, but feels a little off-putting because I can tell. To me, the ChatGPT voice is so obvious now.
now there's a lot of fear around AI replacing us. But we've now just talked about human agency and judgment and spirituality, also just the importance of authenticity, of human connection. How do you see this moment differently than perhaps many people are seeing it?
Yeah, I believe that human agency is a core part of it, and our human story plays a very real role in society. And I think it's necessary that we scale human agency because that will be the great multiplier that will ensure that we decide and we name the role that the tool is going to play in society rather than the tool deciding for us. But if we don't choose to take agency over our own lives and then agency over our work, then we're creating space for the tools to make decisions on behalf of, theoretically. I also find that, like any technology implementation, there requires a very sophisticated system to integrate that culturally. And it also requires humans to operate with those systems in a way that is intelligent, that's of sound mind, that really understands the intricacies of the culture of the organization. And this is almost at an individual organizational level, right? And then deciding the best ways to engage and interact with those tools and putting definition and naming around where and when and why and how the tools should be used and where and when and why and how the tools should not be used. Because AI is not necessarily designed to do every function inside of an organization. There are things that it does really well, and there are things that it does less well. And it should be that way, right? The idea that AI is just going to replace, it's like you need to sit down with yourself and you need to really think through what does it actually have a propensity to not necessarily replace, but help make better. And then there also has to be an ROI to it as well. There's a lot of cost to AI. It can be very expensive. Look at OpenAI shutting down Sora. There just fundamentally wasn't an ROI. An article I read the other day said they were spending $1 million a day just to keep the program running, and the return just wasn't there. So there's just very real factors that have been proven about what technologies in our in the infrastructure of a culture, of a society, of an organization are actually valuable and where and why and
Totally.
how we leverage
Totally.
them.
Totally.
And for some reason, AI is getting this narrative wrapped around it that it's just the great technology that's going to fundamentally reshape everything everywhere all at once. And I challenge it, and I challenge it hard, not because I'm afraid of it. I love using it. I use AI every single day in a variety of mediums. It's not out of fear that I'm saying this. It's actually quite the opposite. It's out of excitement and joy, but also a grounded realism rather than an idealism that's completely fabricated based on a narrative that's being shaped in society.
Totally. And I echo that. It was interesting. I had a conversation with somebody not that long ago, about a month ago, and I was in the process of hiring a person who now is working for me. And she worked at a big tech company, and so she does understand a lot about AI, and probably more than me. But she said, no, you do not need to hire that person. AI can do everything for you. And I was like, well, I can tell you right now that AI cannot do what I'm hiring this person to do. I mean, I don't want AI to do this. And actually, I am a very human business. And for a number of reasons, this role it will never be AI, actually. And it's just, I think it's really important, back to agency, back to self-awareness, back to all of these things that we have talked about on this conversation. I think it's important to know where you stand, to know what you're about, to know where your skills lie, to know what you're doing, and then intentionally move forward with what makes sense to you at that time in that context. But blindly just moving forward with whatever it might be, AI also is part of that. It actually can probably just be more costly or dangerous. And I think agency and intentionality, back to what we talked about right at the beginning, is so important, and that self-awareness.
Well, and I was thinking about this the other day because the conversation I often hear is just the narrative of Gen AI and agentic are going to replace. So it's seen as a takeaway. It's scarcity mindset, which is very ingrained in our humanity. But if we flip the narrative to an abundance mindset and we say, what if it's an and? What if it's a build rather than a break? And not that there won't be some level of disruption and some level of breaking down systems and challenging and questioning of like where and when and why and how we need to adapt, evolve, change. That's how we advance as a species. That's how we glow up. That's how we become better. So the idea of breaking is always seen as a negative, but I think it's more of a break to build and a build rather than a build to break. And so the role of disruption, I keep thinking about how much more we can do.
Yeah.
If I have 10 humans on my team and 10 of us now have access to these tools like Gen and Agentic AI, how much can we create?
Yeah.
How fast can we create? How much more can we build together? How much more can we advance society and culture onward rather than just having a scarcity mindset of, I'm just going to maintain the status quo. Instead, have an abundance mindset of, with these tools, I can do infinitely more than I ever imagined possible. Whereas before I could advance 3 to 4 infinite aspirations, now I can advance hundreds of infinite aspirations. And that starts to solve for just the fundamental layers of society that historically have been overlooked or deprioritized simply because we only have so much time. And you touched on the word time earlier, and I was thinking a lot about that. And I've been thinking about how time is another nuance that gets very little airtime in our daily thinking, but it's one of the most powerful layers of our entire species. You want to build wealth, but you need time because time is required to actually develop your portfolio. You want to be healthy, it literally requires time because you have to invest in yourself and eating the right clean whole foods and getting the exercise in and having the mental break time to pause and to work on your brain health. Everything in life requires time. And so I think in a very similar way, these tools have the ability to give us more time to do even more meaningful work, but we have to decide that's what we're going to use the tools for.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we create more equity? How do we create more space for belonging? How do we start to fundamentally reshape the just the fundamentals of a society and of a culture? And I just really wonder what more can we do with the technology rather than how do we continue to just stay in the status quo?
Yeah.
And so as we think back about the early part of the conversation on that's why rebellious optimism matters. That's why agency is essential. And that's why bringing our own belief system forward to saying and truly believing in an empowered way that I'm going to decide how I assign these tools to my life and my work. And I'm going to use that intelligence in a way that starts to advance far more than I could have done before these tools existed.
We have come to the end of our podcast, but I don't want to finish until asking you if you could leave people who are listening with a final thought or a question or an idea that they might want to carry with them.
I think it goes back to something that you and I discussed in our last conversation. And it was a question that my therapist asked me, Brad, how do you define God? And immediately I just said, the inevitability of intention. And as I've reflected on that more over several weeks, what I realized is as humans, we're very complex. We're this contradiction, this enigma within ourselves where there's always tension. And tension is for some reason perceived negatively, but really, I think tension can be a very powerful force multiplier. And so, I guess my question that I would love to leave is what is the tension within self, the contradictions, the parts of you that sort of are this enigma? And rather than seeing it as a net negative, how do you start to reshape your thinking such that those conflicting parts of you actually can continue to be in tension, but work together to create and build a better version of yourself, a better life, and a more beautiful reality?
That's beautiful. I have absolutely adored this conversation. I could keep talking for another hour. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you do want to leave our listeners with?
I guess I would maybe say we've only touched on certain things, right? We haven't
Yeah.
had an absolute narrative. And maybe it's important that it is a bit unfinished. The conversation on AI, I could spend hours on on the philosophical principles that I believe are essential for how we actually build that in. And at the same time, we're intentionally just rolling around in the messy beauty and wonder of it all right now in its current state.
Have to have another conversation. And next year we'll do this again and we'll see where things have evolved to and see what your thoughts are on everything. I think that would be a good idea. Thank you so much for your time and for joining me. I've adored it.
Oh my gosh, same. I'm like on a high now. I'm like ready to
I
go.
know. I'm buzzing.